Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Prize Fighters, Circus Freaks, and Gangsters. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greta. And we are here to talk about the possibly more controversial than I thought, The Greatest Showman.
I'm not even sure how you could debate the controversy of this film, but I look forward to hearing your defense of the incredibly indefensible monster who was P.T. Barnum. I just like, and I would like to add that I discovered right as I was reading this that I was born 3 miles from where P.T. Barnum was born, and I am happy to only have set foot in Connecticut twice since then. So I will only go back to dig up his grave and defile his corpse.
Oh, boy. Well, before we get too far into the movie, I wanted to drop a little circus history on you, and I bet you've got some things to add as well.
Okay.
Just the word circus more or less comes from the Roman buildings where they had chariot races and stuff. But those were oblongs. They were not round.
Yes. It was the Hippodrome.
Right. And at one point, part of Barnum's act or complex of entertainments, he included the word hippodrome because he was thinking that as well. But what was the circus was also used for gladiatorial combat and the exhibition and fights with exotic animals from around the world. So it was this mishmash where the hoi polloi, the average person, was able to come in and get some entertainment. And then the nicer people had their boxes further away from the grubbiness.
Oh, yes. The well-to-do. Well, just as they do now. I mean, you've got the VIP boxes up at sporting events that where they don't have to deal with the riffraff, and they have air conditioning, and they don't have to eat the same food that the plebes are eating. They're having lobster tails.
Exactly.
Why they want to eat sea cockroach instead of a hot dog, I don't know. But I prefer my land cockroaches to sea cockroaches.
Yeah, sort of that circus kind of died away, but in the 18th century...
I think circus actually meant ring, right? In Latin? Doesn't it mean ring? Like a circle?
More or less, yeah. Except the original circus buildings were oblongs. Mm-hmm. They were the hippodromes.
Yep.
But yeah, the 18th century, Europe became very fascinated with the classical world. So, poetry, the Iliad, philosophy, art, architecture, dress... all of that came back to the attention of people who had time to read, and that included the circus. And so as, there were more of these like super crazy well-trained horses in Europe because they were doing dressage and all of the cool military movements.
Yes. Oh, I have sat through the Lippenzahner horses waddling sideways, and my God, I had flashbacks in the opening scene of this movie, like, oh my God, I'm going to be bored to death, aren't I? Holy shit, these horses are going to walk sideways, and I'm going to have to clap. My dad and I were so disgusted walking out of there. He spent so much money to watch horses walk sideways. Oh my God, what a nightmare.
So the original European circuses, they had the acrobats, so that was pulling from sort of the acrobatic and gymnastic traveling entertainer tradition of Europe. Then they also started to include trick horse riding as well. And so that sort of became modern circus as we know it. And then they added in all sorts of other like trained dogs, trained pigs, trained cats, trained, whatever domestic animals, trained sheep. I don't know.
Yes, that's so. Isn't that where the term dog and pony show comes from?
Yeah,
trained dogs, trained ponies. Yeah,
right. And so British circus was sort of the beginning of what we think of as modern circus. This guy, Astley, kind of got it started in the 1770s. This guy, John Bill Ricketts, who was also an Englishman, started doing performances in the U.S. Reportedly, George Washington actually attended an early one.
His name doesn't doesn't mean anything now because nobody knows what rickets are. But in a time when rickets was a disease that people would get, that's an unfortunate name.
Yeah. And then this guy, Hezekiah Bailey, my bad. He sort of started American modern circus in the early 1800s and actually brought an elephant into the circus.
Oh, interesting. What was his name?
Hezekiah.
Hezekiah. So The first person I recall reading about in the circus was in the 1700s. There in the United States, there were a couple of people in and around Connecticut who would do horse tricks in big top tents. Yeah,
Right.
and so but I don't recall hearing his name before, so that was a new one on me.
Yeah, so Hecaliah Bailey, yeah, he sort of started.
Hecaliah. The people
Yeah.
back then used to go wild. I mean, people think people have wild names now, but I mean, Hecaliah. That's just jamming letters together that don't make any sense. Hecaliah. That's a Hecaliah of a name.
Right. And so
That's just set up for dad jokes.
oh my goodness. But sort of taking the horse tricks and instead of doing them the long ways, doing them in a circle. And sort of when they talk about 3-ring circus and the size of that circus ring, that was sort of determined by how small of a circle you could do horse tricks in.
Oh, interesting. And so for anybody who doesn't know what horse tricks are or what dressage is, because you didn't grow up
Right.
bougie as hell, do you want to explain what it is, or shall I? I have less experience in 4-H than you do, probably.
Well, for me, because, I went to different like rodeos and stuff growing up too, but it was the people who would sort of ride standing up on horses, jumping off of horses, jumping on horses, balancing headstands on horses or 2 people on horses or just all sorts of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, standing on the back of a horse while it's at full gallop is an act of gymnastic ability that you cannot even understand until you've seen it done. And I hadn't seen it done until during COVID. There was this incredibly stupid show we used to watch on TBS with Bert Kreischer, and it was just like some talent show. And they had a woman on there who was doing it, and it was crazy to watch. And
it's going in a circle,
they're
too,
doing
right?
handstands on the back of a galloping horse, doing backflips. Like, they're basically doing what the routine you would do on a balance beam on the back of a horse. It's crazy.
Right.
So impressive to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, they were impressive then, they're impressive now. It's the horse tricks were often the big act, but they'd also include trapeze, gymnastics. There would be some clowning, and there's like a long tradition of European clowns all tied up in with like religious ceremonies and pagan displays of craziness. So it all just sort of got jumbled together.
Oh yes, right before the breakdown in Bohemian Rhapsody, where they go Scaramouche,
Right.
Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? That is about Scaramouche Jones, who is the clown who popularized mime clowning, because back then they used to talk. This man had the most insanely tragic life. He was in concentration camps, and like this man had been through it all, and he was
Right.
out there like trying to make people smile. But so his name Scaramouche comes from it was a role in clowning back from the Commedia dell'arte, which was the Italian form of theater that used to, it's like street theater.
Right,
And
right.
so
Yeah.
it was basically a role that he would play, the Scaramouche, and it was a trickster or something like that. And yeah, so that's where they get the appearance, and then he started doing the miming because they'd spoken before that. This is all
Right.
weird stuff that I had never... like, the idea that clowns had an evolution never really occurred to me. Here we are.
I mean, clowns have always been a part of the uncomfortable in all places, all religions. You'll find them the world over, and they are always there to sort of elbow reality and make it wobble.
Do you feel as though clowns elbow reality and make it wobble, or do they just make children uncomfortable and make you wonder why you're standing near this person?
There's a lot of ways to look at it, but they are definitely an instrument of discomfort for sure.
They certainly are. And being a clown could actually kill you back in the day. As I discovered, some idiot covered himself in a type of because they made their own face paint back then.
Right.
And so
right.
he had covered himself in his own face paint, and he couldn't get it off because it was tar based, and so he kept collapsing, and he ended up, they doused him in solvents to try to get all the tar and stuff off him because he was overheating and he couldn't sweat. So he was just going to die. And so they doused him in solvents and left him out on the roof to try to get the stuff to come off him, and he ended up dying. But it's crazy to think that you would die of your stage makeup.
I mean, all sorts of people would die of their makeup. I mean, because it had lead and lime and all sorts of terrible stuff in it. So, nothing good there. But okay, so that's enough about the history of circus. It went through this evolution.
Yes, we are here to discuss The Greatest Showman.
Yes.
Which is a movie you chose.
Yes.
And stars Hugh Jackman. So it stars Wolverine, Zach Efron, Zendaya. So we've got Wolverine, Spider-Man's girlfriend. Is Zach Efron in the MCU yet? I don't think so.
I don't know. But Hugh Jackman actually came up through musical theater. So this was sort of like, all right.
Oh, yeah. He was in Les Mis, too.
Yeah, I've done all this. I've got Wolverine money. I'm going to make the movie that I always wanted to make. It's going to be an all singing, all dancing extravaganza.
Where he's going to whitewash the horrific deeds of a man who should be just reviled. He didn't at least write this nightmare of an ahistorical I mean, this would be like if somebody Ron DeSantis is going to get this movie in the curriculum in Florida as part of this is going to be factual history, I think, in Florida, because this is the same argument as, well, they learned a trade while they were slaves, so it's okay. This argument is that this movie.
I mean, one thing that is really useful to point...
Well, these slaves got rich, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's really important to point out that this kind of musical that takes an actual set of historical events and then smushes it around, strips out all the uncomfortable parts, and sets it to music, that is a very typical way to retell a lot about the 19th century in the 20th century. You think about Oklahoma or Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, all of these musicals that purportedly dealt with events or, ways people lived in the 19th century, but they made it perky and you could dance to it.
It's something. If this movie, so I went through several stages while watching this film.
Okay.
I watched the first 30 minutes of it, and by the end of that 30, I was just like, my God, I'm just going to try to get through it in 20-minute bursts. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take notes for 20 minutes and then stop.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was going to break you.
No, because we need to switch it up and do different stuff, and I was like, maybe I'll end up liking it. So 25 minutes into it, when I hadn't done any research to remember why I hated P.T. Barnum so much, I was like, this movie's great. I love the message of it. Be weird, embrace your weird, you'll succeed. It's good. And then I did some research, and then I went back to the movie, and I was like, this is trash. These people are garbage. That person didn't exist. That person was actually miserable the whole time. They died the next day.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. The whole extra sort of romantic subplot that they stuck in here was just to make it more like a normal musical. It had no basis in anything.
I think they left the coolest part of this. The two things that this man did that were cool, they left out of the movie. He had 4 insanely cool houses that they never even alluded to. One of them was called Iranistan, and it was this fanciful notion of what house, a Victorian house in Turkey would look like. And it was such a cool looking house.
Right. It's more of the mysterious East.
Yeah, again. Absolutely. And then he had one that was Brighton Pavilion, but smaller. It was like a scale version of Brighton Pavilion. It was amazing. But he did that, and then he is the guy who made acting okay for people to do.
Yeah.
Acting became an accepted profession because of this man. And those two things, he's okay in. I will give him that.
I mean,
I will lay that down.
They did sort of get into that a little bit in this movie. But again, this is the wrong piece of media to be looking for moral messages. Because, it's a very typical Technicolor fluff piece.
Well, I mean, we might as well get into it. This was a beautiful thing to look at.
Yeah.
It was, and I will say, there was a quote that I read that was perfect for this film. Like Barnum itself, it's an elegant fraud, nice enough to look at if you don't look too close.
Ooh.
That came from a review in Slate, and it's perfect. This is an elegant fraud of a film, but it's so beautiful. Even the computer-generated horses doing the dumbass Lippins on her shit at the beginning of the movie was amazing. You're seeing these horses do dressage, and I'm like, well, it looks pretty. I could stare at this.
Yeah.
And the costumes, my God, like in the opening scene, he was wearing that jacket through the whole thing, but his crushed velvet jacket.
Right.
My first thought, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, well, I bet the man who made that jacket in real life died the next day. Like in the 19th century, like the amount of mercury he must have inhaled, but it was a gorgeous jacket.
And it really sort of clung on to the fascination everybody had in their outfits at that time with military regalia and putting braid on everything. So, like, the ringmaster's outfit for modern circus really calls back to all of, like, the super duper fancy, complicated military jackets everybody was wearing at the time.
Yeah, and he gave a lot of his performers military names, too. Colonel this and General that. And yeah.
Because, America we had come out of two pretty major wars, especially for a country our size, at the end of 1815, and then we were just going on military adventures, both expanding the country, but also fighting in North Africa and South America. We were fighting all the damn time, the damn where at this point in our history.
Yeah, we were fighting Native Americans in every corner of America. We'd just gotten done fighting the British again. We were getting ready to fight the Mexicans.
We were, running around shooting at the Barbary pirates. We were shooting at the Spanish. We were helping the Spanish. We were shooting at the Portuguese. We were helping the Portuguese. The Monroe Doctrine was in the midst of being developed, where like, all right, Europe, you can have Europe. We will have the Americas.
Meanwhile, we're basically the Vietnam of the 19th century, because the British and the French are fighting a proxy war in the United States. That's what the Revolutionary War was. That's what the War of 1812 was. It was that they're competing over who's going to control North America. And finally, the French said, whatever, we don't need it. We'll take Canada.
that worked out for them, or not. They're like, screw it. We're going to Polynesia.
Yeah, they got Quebec out of it, I guess.
Sorta.
De Gaulle really tried to get it back in the 60s, but...
That's true. Okay, so
yes.
We have a really catchy musical number at the beginning.
Well, we had a musical number that was very pretty. I don't know if I would call it catchy. There were two songs that I thought were okay, but that was not one of them.
I don't know. I guess it did catch your attention, I guess.
Okay. Well, if you like the song, you're welcome.
Yeah,
I'm curious, did you enjoy the soundtrack to this? Like, have you listened to it?
I enjoyed it in the movie, but it's not something I would just sort of put on to listen to.
It's not Avenue Q. I'm not going to listen to this. And I love a musical. Like, I love musical theater. I don't like musical film, however. I did not like Sweeney Todd, or I don't know what it is, but I think it's because there's an energy you get out of the live performance. Yeah, kind of like P.T. Barnum was all about. And without that live energy, it doesn't have the same hook for me, I think.
Yeah, so they talk about in this thing that he came up from a really poor background, which is true.
Oh, yeah, they really hammered on the classism aspect in this hard.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's really important, because that's sort of what was going on in the 19th century. America, even though it was supposed to be everybody can work their way up from the bottom, some of these bars to advancing in society were really being put in place at this period.
And they were super invisible. In 1848, democracy was murdered everywhere in the world except in the United States and in the heart of Giuseppe Garibaldi and in Italy or wherever, South America, wherever he was at the time. But those are the only two places that democracy even existed. And then so in the US, I think at this time you were still not able to order a la carte, right? Like when you ordered food in a restaurant, you would just get what you would, the special of the day, right?
For the most part.
It was considered really impolite wasn't it? To try to order a la carte, because then you were being above everyone, right?
Right. Because when you went out to dinner, you would go out, with your partner or with a group of people, and the table would just sort of get served together. And so if you were trying to eat something different, you're like, well, look who thinks they're special. Exactly.
It was very anti-democratic. So now what we're thinking of as like a communist or a socialist mentality, that's what democracy meant at that point. And so we don't really read about these classes, these kind of invisible walls that people had to deal with. And so I will say this film was great for that. Like that glass wall that existed for certain people that it's hard, we don't even understand. Like, it could just have been something as simple as what you're wearing is slightly off, and it is a cue to everybody in there that you're not supposed to be there.
Right. I mean, this is when sort of did your relatives come over on the Mayflower? How long has your family been here? When you talk about the nativists in some of our other podcasts, that's specifically what that means. It's like, oh, well, my family's been in Virginia since 17 bloody bloody blah.
Right.
And
right.
you just got here in 1802. So you're new. And then how long you had your money as well. If you went out and like had a successful flour mill and built it up into a flour business, and you were the first person in your family to have made money, people would look down on you like, oh, you worked for your money?
The nouveau riche versus the old money.
And so a lot of that is really going on.
Yep.
And you definitely see that over and over in this movie. It's like, whoa, you worked for your money? I'm sorry. Ew.
And, that still exists. The neighborhood that I lived in, that my parents lived in right before they moved to South, was a neighborhood filled with blue bloods. They were all people who came over on the Mayflower, and
right.
My mom was never able to like fit into that scene because my family was not blue bloods. Like my dad was adopted, my mom was Southern, so like they were just kind of on the outskirts of this community because they didn't go to Yale, they didn't go to Harvard. And those people are just admitted because they are the grandchildren of people who went there and the sons and daughters of people who went there. Like, so they're just ushered into these things and then given jobs when they get out, but they look down on everybody around them.
Oh yeah. They talk about right now, affirmative action is this evil thing. But if you look at these really high status colleges, even though like you have the richest 1%, it's like 1 in 6 people who go to the highest status colleges come from the 1%. And you're like, who's getting affirmative action?
Yeah, Donald
these
Trump
places?
got a graduate degree from Penn and never read a book in his... Get the fuck out of here. How do you graduate from any college without ever having read a book in your life?
I think you have to donate a library.
But he got out of grad school. Yeah. Jesus
a dorm?
Christ.
A lunchroom?
Yeah, but so long as you use the right social cues, nobody knows you're an illiterate scumbag. You just have to not say ain't and not say y'all.
Or you can
don't end a sentence with a preposition.
That, but just pay off
use
enough
the correct
people.
fork. There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
And then claim you didn't do it.
So P.T. Barnum is, he's one of these.
By the way, I will say Donald Trump loves him some P.T. Barnum.
Oh.
You know he does. Woo!
The only exception is I swear Trump would say either he improved upon everything Barnum did or he's never heard of it and made up all of the same stuff himself.
Oh, without question. And P.T. Barnum did outwork Donald Trump. I mean, pretty much everybody outworks Donald Trump.
God, yeah.
But, yeah.
The movie opens with a splashy song, and then we see poor little P.T. Phineas as a downtrodden upon kiddo, and he works himself up into what would have been considered at the time sort of a lower middle class job. You can afford an apartment and kind of a family, and that world is not for him.
No, but he had the love of his life that he met as a youth when his father was the tailor for this beautiful young girl who's getting ready to go to finishing school, and she's practicing her tea service methods, and he falls in love with her after making her giggle, and then he vows that he's going to earn her family's respect by earning the money that he needs to in order to win her hand in marriage. Which,
yeah, and there's a little truth to that.
Is there? So,
yes,
because his father was a tailor in the film and they were farmers in real life. And then what he did was he scammed the lottery to make money and then bought a grocery store and that failed.
I just mean him meeting Charity at a really young age and making money so he could marry her and his family hating his guts.
Well, they did get that he stole that he scammed money out of the banks in order to get a business, but
to buy a different.
Yeah, I still think that they probably went a little light on it because that scamming the lottery seems to generally take money away from charities, as I understand it. But
at that day and age, the lottery wasn't as much about putting money into education and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was just saying, like, the whole thing that he met Charity at a young age and, like, married her against her family's wishes, that was all true. Like, and that more highlights that Charity was of that class where she just didn't get to meet very many interesting people. And so Barnum was, like, the most exciting person she'd ever met. She's like, hell yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. And that was a big thing in the 1800s. Like the John Jacob Astor and all these people coming up and, crushing the other, stepping on everybody's necks to get to the top.
Right.
That, I will agree. That is pretty dead on. And it does encapsulate a lot of the rags to riches stories of the 19th century pretty nicely.
And then also sort of imprisoning your daughters once you're wealthy, and then expecting to foist them into a marriage that you want to sort of up your status. Like, that was also very typical.
Oh, it was a popular thing. I mean, the story of Marie Antoinette is just that.
Oh, God!
She was a hostage, and then they cut her head off.
Pretty much. I mean, she was really brainwashed into her way of life. But yeah, that woman had very little say about how her life was going to go, for sure. So Charity, on the other hand, was just poor enough that she was able to go out and have a way more exciting life than a lot of women of her day and age.
Yeah, she definitely. I honestly, of all the research that I did not do any research on his real life wives, except I know that his second wife, I know a little bit about her.
Way young. Like 40 years younger.
Yeah, 40 years younger than him. The daughter of a guy who worked for him.
And actually because
he's a class act.
The Fish family had a bunch of money too.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that branch of the Fish family that his second wife came from was particularly wealthy, but the Fishes were well-to-do in the Mayflower set for sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so yeah, he scams the banks and gets some money and buys a museum on Broadway, and this is the age in New York that we saw in Gangs of New York, but a big thing that's going on right now is science. Everybody's talking about science. The world is getting a lot bigger for people. There's wonders and amazements and things that they've never heard of. I mean, people were seeing lions and tigers and bears for the first time. Yeah,
and this was when we were also getting the beginnings of all of our popular media. So magazines and science magazines, right. Popular science magazines were coming out. So people were learning about stuff they had no idea about before, and the world was growing at an exponential rate.
Yeah, there were germs and galaxies and the biggest things you couldn't imagine and the smallest things you couldn't imagine. So you could just make shit up and people would go, I don't know, sure, maybe that works.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, they're making discoveries every day. So if they found a mermaid, all right, well, shit. Did you know that there's trains?
Right.
We can get across the country in one day.
I mean, we had talked about Madame Blavatsky previously, and she was getting in on this whole thing about like the ability to talk psychically, and there was real scientific investigation into the idea of psi powers, because you could talk across the country using electricity, so maybe psychic powers were a thing. So there was real scientific investigation, and people pretty much concluded, okay, this is not a thing, but boy, oh boy, was it money Christmas for a good con man.
Oh, absolutely. And so back in ancient times, all of the like special effects and things like that were going on were happening in religious temples and things like that, because they were using them to bring in money. And so this was carried forward, people making clocks and things like that. But then on the other side of the coin, you had actors and actresses traveling with these traveling salesmen who would be making all these different potions and elixirs and whatnot. And so in certain ones, they would say that this ointment or this liniment or whatever can heal a wound in record time.
Right.
And then they would pretend to just jam a knife in somebody's chest on the stage. Blood would come spurting out because they've got like a pig's bladder filled with blood or something.
Right.
And the person collapses on the ground and like everybody's gasping and they yank the knife out. It's all gory. There's pig guts all over the ground. And then they heal this person. So they're doing stuff like that. And so the Theosophists and all these bunkum people that Houdini went around getting. They would have these seances and all this stuff, and they would use all these goofy special effects that they ended up using in horror movies and things like that afterwards in order to make people believe in this. And that's where people went every night. So like when they're going to these dime museums or the seance the next night, they go to a dime museum one day to see the world's shortest person stand next to the world's tallest person and sing a song together, and then they would go next door to the seance, and then they would go to a bar, and then they would go to some other weird shit. And that's New York at this point. And so
that's this environment.
This museum was the perfect. I'm not hating on the man's entrepreneurial spirit or his ability to see a market and exploit it, but as a human being, he was horrible.
Yeah.
As a businessman, pretty impressive. I mean, he wasn't.
Yeah, no, he really figured out kind of what all of these social media algorithms do. It's like what gets people to come in the door, and I'll try amping this up, or I'll take some of this out, like what's causing people to come out. And so he had bought this museum, and there was a giraffe and a stuffed elephant in it, and people are like, they just stand there, and it's like kind of educational. Ew. And so that's when he started picking up sort of his freak show characters.
Well, did you notice that early on, there was a girl who looked like she had just stepped out of a Total Recall. Like she was one of the Martians who had been mutated on Mars and had like kind of a lumpy face. She like gave a young PT some money or something at the beginning of the film, and she was wearing a hood.
Right, yeah.
And then later on, there was he saw the guy who would become Tom Thumb. And like the only people who were being showing him kindness were these quote unquote freaks, the people who were they had abnormal physiognomy,
outcasts from society for some physical deformity.
Yes, and so I thought that was a really neat way to kind of foreshadow what was coming, because he was seeing like, oh well, the only people who are really pleasant to me in this shitty world are these people that nobody else likes.
Right.
So we're kind of all going to band together in this loving family of weirdness, which I love that message. I love the message. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. They definitely made more of P.T. Barnum's ability to sort of see past, because at this point there was also this idea that your physical outer form was a representation of your soul. So if you had any sort of physical deformity, clearly something about you was evil or off. And people would even justify that about people who had dark skin, that it was a representation of their evilness.
Which, of course, made no fucking sense, since there was no medicine and everybody was deformed and limping and crippled and had diseases and was shitting their pants at all times from dysentery and cholera and every other thing. So the idea that they would be unkind to a person who was not perfect makes no sense.
But it is an interesting way to sort of shuffle off any sort of responsibility to your fellow man. It's like, oh, well, they got wounded or they got sick. Well, they must have done something bad to deserve it. That was definitely a way people were thinking at this point. And there was definitely a strain of what's called muscular Christianity that pushed that narrative.
Oh, yes. And I have written a great deal about muscular Christianity. At some point, I will pay for the outtakes of my 30 for 30 episode, which was actually just there I was just there to be interviewed about muscular Christianity. And I did like an hour of my 3 hours there was just me regurgitating everything I knew about muscular Christianity.
Yeah. And
what a horror that was. And he liked to exploit that too, because he was a really, really big fan, for anybody who's listening to this specifically to get the strongman and lifting stuff. He was the guy who dug up all these weird giants that you see in old lifting books, like Angus McCaskill. And so he would always have them perform with really, really small people. And I'm wondering, did the big people, were they judging those people? Because the Angus McCaskill apparently didn't even have acromegaly. He happened to be somehow 7'5".
I don't know. I mean, you think about the number of people who are malnourished as children and so probably never got much above 5 feet. And you've got people who are just like 6 feet tall or 6.5 feet tall. Bill the Butcher's running around.
It seemed like Britain was just littered with these gigantic people for no reason in the 18th century and the 19th century. It was very strange.
This is the thing. These tall, big people have always been around. They obviously got to eat a good amount as kids. Now they just play professional sports.
Yeah, but none of them are 7'5" and 510 pounds with an 80-inch muscular chest. That is like the size of him is absurd. It blows my mind. And I've stood next to Eddie Hall and taken a picture, and Eddie Hall is 6'8" and like 400 pounds, and I looked like a small child who'd never lifted weights next to him. And so but he would look like a small child who'd never lifted weights next to Angus McCaskill, which is crazy to me.
I mean, just the gamut of like what different bodies produce in terms of different hormones and their abilities. Like it is a long, long bell curve, man.
Yeah, our biochemical individuality is fascinating.
Yes.
Like the idea that a person, like 1 out of every 4 people that you see, their heart is on the right side of their chest. Like, well, that would have been nice if they had told us that in science class growing up. How did I have to get to grad school to figure that out?
I was always fascinated as a kid by what they call mirror image twins, where they're identical twins, but instead of being like they're like your left hand and your right hand, like everything is reversed. Mm-hmm. And so it's I
didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
So are Siamese twins like Chang and Eng from P.T. Barnum's Circus? Are those biologically what did you call it?
So there's just regular identical twins where 2 twins come out of one egg. And so Chang and Eng are like that. They were pretty fortunate dudes because they were only attached by like this ligament in their chest, whereas a lot you can have sort of these parasitic twins where you just have a partial body coming out of your body.
Yeah, like Quatu. Again, we're back to Total Recall. I'm making this ancient movie reference, but here we go.
And so Chang and Eng, like they were never like with P.T. Barnum. They would like show up for guest starring roles occasionally.
So the Chang and Eng they're the source of the name Siamese twins, and Siam is the old name for Thailand. It used to be called the Kingdom of Siam. So so these guys come to the U.S. and I didn't write down Chang and Eng's story because what I did write down is slave owners born in Thailand who began as indentured servants. So they ended up with many, many slaves. And,
yes.
Because everybody in this story is fucking horrible. Every single person in the story from start to finish is trash, I think. I didn't find a person who I was like, I wouldn't burn that person alive. I didn't find that person.
Okay, so let's get back to our story here.
Oh wait, I would just like to just inject this one fun fact, super fun fact. So he was born in 1810, and when he was 26, the way that Barnum actually got popular was that he this 26-year-old he leased an 80-year-old woman for $1,000. He leased a slave for $1,000, and then she was blind and handicapped, and she had a stroke. And he pulled out all of her teeth and then told everybody she was 161 years old and made her work for 10 to 12 hours a day until she dropped dead. And then after she died, he charged 50 cents a person.
He sold tickets.
Yeah, 50 cents a person to see her autopsy. And that is, well, like $8 today. $8 today. He's a classy man.
Yeah. I was definitely going to bring that up.
And that was 35. He leased her for $35,000. So for the price of a Hyundai Sonata, he leased a woman for a year, and until she died. He drove it into the ground. He drove that old car into the ground, and then he decided, well, I'm going to get myself some new freaks, and then that's when he got some other freaks.
Right. And so on one hand, people are like, oh, well, he gave them a better life than they would have had because, they had this family and whatever. And it's like, did he though? Because while he did sort of give them a different life of being just like hidden in a room by their family, they were looked at and laughed at. And he made I believe, a shit ton of money off of them. Is that correct?
Plus, 2 of them he kidnapped. So he kidnapped 2 albino black kids. So there were 3 black people who worked for him originally. 1 was a slave he leased. 2 were kidnapped albino children. And the 3rd was a guy with microcephaly, which is a pinhead. It's the tiny little head. Yeah. Like Beetlejuice from the Howard Stern show. And he dressed him up in a gorilla suit and called him the Wild Man of Borneo. And
Right.
yeah.
Oh, no, I thought the wild men of Borneo were these other two twins.
Oh, there were wild men of Borneo too. So there was a wild man of Borneo. I got very confused. The wild men of Borneo were actually they were British a pair of British dwarf strongmen who used to wrestle regular sized men and have lifting competitions against regular sized men.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are way off track here. Anyway, so he buys the museum, he gets the freaks, he takes merciless advantage of them. He manages to get really pretty damn rich. Meets Queen Victoria, hears about Jenny Lind, and at this point Barnum is pretty
He met a bunch of European royalty. He and Tom Thumb like traveled around. So Tom Thumb he bought Tom Thumb as a baby, I think.
Yeah,
or he rented
like 4
him.
years old. Yeah, they make him an adult in the movie, and that's some bullshit.
Oh, and he bought the bearded lady as a baby, as a 9-month-old baby. But he paid $150 a week for her. But Tom Thumb, I looked it up because I knew Tom Thumb as a grocery store growing up because I lived in Texas, and so he's an Arthurian legend, which I didn't like. He's a dwarf and Arthurian legend.
The idea of Tom Thumb and then his girlfriend Thumbelina have been part of like the European fairy tale canon for centuries.
And then it was a really popular book in the 1800s, right? And that's where he pulled his name in from.
Right. But then he made him General Tom Thumb.
Thumb.
And it also leaned into the idea of Napoleon being this little short guy, which he wasn't. But the British were all about like, oh yeah, Napoleon's this like little guy. And so having General Tom Thumb was also leaning on the idea of short little Napoleon as well.
Yeah, but Queen Victoria saw them. I mean, like it was Queen Victoria was the Tsar of Russia, the King of France, and the King of Belgium. All did audiences with them, and with Tom Thumb they put him in a tiny carriage drawn by Shetland ponies for I think it was with the King Louis Philippe.
Yeah.
That was actually pretty fun. And that guy was so rich that when Barnum went broke, he bailed him out.
So Tom Thumb...
Like, he was making millions of dollars, Tom Thumb.
Bailed out Barnum. I believe that, yeah.
Yeah.
And again...
Tom Thumb got rich as hell. Chang and Eng got rich. Actually, a lot of those slave people got rich as hell. But that, again, it goes back to, like, I don't know. I don't know where do you come down on that?
Exactly. It's complicated. But I wanted to get back to this class thing. Like, all the Europeans were so, like, the European royalty, they were super bored. And so they're like, let us get in some of these amusing Americans.
I mean, the Tsar of Russia doesn't really surprise me. They were having handicapped people fight dwarves in the Winter Palace for entertainment. So, yeah, they're monsters. But, like, the rest of the, like, the Habsburgs, and you would think that the Habsburgs would have been looking at each other and be like, well, they couldn't be more deformed than we are. God damn.
That's so true.
And Tom Thumb was actually the produce of two first cousins fucking, so he was really kind of Habsburgian.
There you go. But yeah, so Barnum gets back to the U.S. after having toured Europe and seen all this and been viewed by royalty and having conversations with them. And all of these like really rich, uptight people who are all climbing the greasy pole of status are like, God damn it. He's met Queen Victoria. Do we have to invite him to our party? No, we don't, because he works for his money. and this really cheesed off Barnum. And so that's really why he brought Jenny Lind. The part in the movie where he's like, hey, I've got to make my shows more respectable. That was real. And so he was bringing Jenny Lind in. She was known as this philanthropist. She was also just sort of seen as this vision of like purity and angelic goodness. And so by him...
She was, I think, the most popular opera singer in Europe at the time, right?
Like, big time. She was the Beyonce of Europe at this point.
Okay, so she wasn't the Adele of Europe. She was the Beyonce of Europe.
Yeah, no, I mean, she was playing to packed crowds, but then she also had social causes she was working for.
Okay, nice.
And so Barnum is like, I want to be a more respectable guy, and so he did promote this tour of America for her and got her to do it by saying, "Hey, I will pay you $100 a show," which again, a lot of money back then, for 150 shows.
Yeah, and so in the movie, they don't mention this, but in real life, she did have the opportunity to break the contract, but she had to pay a penalty in order to do it. But that is a hell of a lot of shows, and she ended up almost playing 100 shows. She played 93, as I recall.
Right. And she was a little shocked. She's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do it." And then she gets to America and like she's greeted by these throngs of people, which had to be a pretty unreal kind of situation for somebody who'd never been to New York.
You know what's great about the Jenny Lind part is that's the only factual part of the entire film. Like from, because he hired her without ever having heard her before, and she
Right.
asks him in the movie, "Why are you doing this? Have you ever even heard me sing?" And he's like, "I have more faith in your reputation than I do in my musical judgment," which was an actual real life quote. And I think that's pretty dope because what the hell does he know about music? No, he's just here to he wants to hire this act. And then when she got to the U.S. and it was so overwhelming, she actually renegotiated her contract to get more money.
Right. Yeah, because she did make a lot of money, but Barnum made even more.
And she made $350,000, which is $12.6 million in modern money. And she donated almost all of it to Swedish public schools.
Yeah.
Barnum made $18 million off her tour, by the way.
Right. She did a lot to update the Swedish educational system, and you could say a lot of how Sweden came into the 20th century riding high had to do with her philanthropy into their school system.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's pretty insane. Very cool. An interesting thing that they do not touch on with Barnum is that when he came back from his European tour, he returned as a teetotaler, somebody who didn't drink. Now, whether or not he was a prohibitionist or he was just against hard liquor, I'm not, like, they don't go into that much, but he definitely did want to reform sort of the hard drinking ways of the American.
So I didn't catch that he became a teetotaler when I was reading, but I did see that he was putting on all these temperance plays and stuff like that, and I thought that was a part of his attempt to legitimize theater because he was using dog shows, flower shows. He put on a bunch of temperance plays, and then he nerfed all these popular plays. He took out the sex, he took out the bad language or whatever might be in there. So Shakespearean plays, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then he would just put them on, and he would say, "Bring your kids. Like this is a place you can bring children."
Right.
And he specifically put educational displays into the museum, like panoramas and dioramas and cosmoramas, which I've never even heard of a cosmorama before, but I assume it's of the cosmos. That's what the little planet...
it was kind of like planetarium type stuff.
Gotcha, a planetarium.
Because again, this is when like the idea of galaxies was happening. Like nobody had ever thought that there were like other giant groups of stars out there in space. That was happening during the 19th century.
Oh shit. Well, yeah. So he I guess he did further education in that way. I mean, it was specifically just so he could make a buck, but he still did it.
Right. And he was one of those family guys who always wants to be the fun dad, but he was trying to think of things where families could come and do stuff together. And that was also part of his involvement in temperance. Like, what's an all family activity you can do? Because the thing men would go out to do for entertainment work.
Yeah, you need to explain to the audience why temperance is important, especially to women at the time, and why he expanded his audience, doubled it with this thing.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about how men and women were being more and more separated starting in the 18th century, but it got like turbocharged in the 19th century. Weirdly, the rise of distilled liquor is all kind of involved in that. And so men would go out to taverns and they would get completely shit-faced on bad alcohol.
Single distilled, people. You've never consumed single distilled liquor, and you wouldn't because it would poison you. Single distilled. When you told me this, I still haven't gotten over it. The triple distilled is the shittiest liquor I've ever had, and it was my hair hurt afterwards. My fucking eyebrows hurt the next day from triple distilled liquor. I would never drink that again. And these people are drinking, so that's rot gut, I guess.
Yeah,
God
it's
almighty.
the rottiest rot gut.
Woof!
And so, card playing and, all sorts of manner of like titillation and freak shows. And these were all sort of ramped up to be the most exciting, but they were also not suitable for family gatherings. And so men were going off and, playing cards and getting wasted. And I don't know.
Was there burlesque at this time? Like, were they stripping it all or?
There was some version of it. As you were starting to get like dirty photographs from Paris and stuff, because this is when all like the can was getting going and stuff like that. Because they were splitting society into male and female more and more, and the middle class was aping the upper class, you didn't have kind of things where whole families could go out together in public and be entertained. You'd like go over to somebody else's house and people were getting bored. And so, so Barnum is like, how about if we take all the sex and violence and booze out of it and make it educational, just sort of like a lot of entertainments are doing now, then bring the whole family in, because women were getting really pissed. It used to be your man went out to drink a bunch of beer with his dudes and he'd come home full and kind of sleepy and go to sleep. But now the amount you can get drunk on like 5% or 8% beer and how fast you can get drunk is pretty slow. But all of a sudden you're getting, alcohol that's 30 proof or 30% alcohol, which is 60 proof, or 45% alcohol or 90 proof, or even getting stuff up to 100 proof, or what they called overproof. So it's like, Everclear type stuff. Like that was becoming a thing. It was being made cheaply because industrial
wife beater brand liquor.
Right, yeah, because suddenly distillation was.
What brand do you drink? I prefer wife beater brand.
But yeah, liquor was getting cheaper and easier to distill and cheaper to sell. And so these guys, instead of just going out and sort of slowly getting happy, sloppy beer drunk, were getting shit-faced, mean, headachy liquor drunk.
Yeah. Yeah, mean, brutal, vicious liquor
and
drunk.
Coming home and beating the shit out of their wives, and the wives would go to the police and say, could you do something about this? And the police, also being all men at this point, would say, well, that, according to the Bible, is really between you and your husband. There's not a damn thing we can do. By the way, according to our adopted British-ish law, he pretty much owns you, so he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah. Yeah, and so drinking was so bad at this time, and the temperance movement was coming up not just because the women were sick of, getting Irish sunglasses every day, but they were also, their bosses were coming and being like, you got to get these guys to stop fucking drinking because everybody's hands are getting caught in the machinery. Either they're drunk at work or they're hungover at work and they can't fucking work, and so they're just or they don't show up for work. And even at this time, the travelers in Ireland developed this ritual where the night before a fight, they'd have to dry out for an entire day. Like, they would just go to church and then sit and stare at a fire and do nothing but take cold showers. And I was like, what the hell? Why are they staying up for 21 straight hours and staring at a fire? It was just so they didn't drink. Because they were just going so goddamn ham. So I guess Barnum, he's lighting his building with limelight. Wasn't that what it was?
Right. Yeah, limelight, which is a crushed mixture of limestone and some other stuff.
Which is also used as an explosive, is it not?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this would be like squirting gasoline into the air or vaporizing gasoline and setting it on fire to light. And so you got these viciously drunk men smashing into everything in a building that's basically ready to explode at any time. And I can understand why he's saying, let's not drink. I think drinking's probably a bad idea. But he also wanted those women to come in here and say, yeah, you're coming to this play, because the first one that he put on was called The Drunkard's Tale or something like that.
Yeah,
and it was
he
had a lot of morality plays in his lecture. It was a lecture hall, apparently, in this museum. And so that's where they put on their morality plays. That is an interesting point of this time period that really gets glossed over is how that like struggle between drinking and not drinking, and then caffeine comes onto the scene and everybody's like, oh, I fucking love caffeine, and then they get cocaine and they're like, oh my god, I love cocaine, and then they get heroin and they're like, oh my god, heroin's the greatest thing ever. So it's just like, and then you got all these people like, maybe you guys should chill the fuck out on that.
Maybe you should slow down. But this is definitely one thing that gets glossed over when you talk about the temperance movement and Carrie Nation and smashing up taverns with hatchets. Is like this whole thing got started because women found it was easier to ban alcohol completely than to get the police to get their husbands to stop fucking wailing on them.
Yeah. I guess in Britain they're blowing stuff up and burning stuff down, and in the US they were just like, well, I guess we're just gonna make them stop drinking.
Yeah, so even though Barnum was trying to become more respectable, there were plenty of New Yorkers who didn't like what he was up to, and so there were all those protests that were going on outside of his museum.
So was that a real thing? People were protesting his museum?
They were definitely protesting because you think about it, his performers, not only did he have, the kidnapped albino black children, he just had races mixing, and people could come see mixed race entertainments, but then also exposing children to the possibly immoral people who were fat or who had beards or were like strangely shaped. Like these were the things that people were worrying were corrupting the public morality.
Oh, corruption of the innocent.
Exactly. And
yes.
so
my Bible's on fire because that man looks wrong. I don't like his colors.
So yeah, going after the people who look different than what you have idealized in your head is always kind of this central theme to like, not only am I right, but you are wrong, and so I have to hurt you about it.
Yes. That is a unique.
We did get a fight.
That is a big. Oh yeah, we do get that. We get that awesome Bryan Singer inspired X-Men style dumbass hypercolor fight where the one guy's fighting like the Blob and the other guy's fighting like Toad, and
I was like, this is the most theatrical fight we're probably gonna see. And
Zendaya's partner dances onto the stage and Superman punches somebody.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, Zendaya in the film is, I assume, like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and make the assumption.
Sure.
She was supposed to be Miss Lala, who was a mulatto Prussian performer who was like the most popular trapeze performer in like the 19th century. And she was in Europe, though. She didn't come to the US, I don't think, at all.
Right. Yeah. The Zendaya character is completely made up here.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be part of the whole theme that PT was, bringing in performers from all over the world and of all, nationalities and backgrounds and colors and whatever. I think you giving the movie credit for bringing up a famous character in Europe, you're giving him a lot of credit.
Yeah, I think that was it's probably more like Mel Gibson accidentally getting a couple of things right in Apocalypto.
Right.
Like the trapeze didn't even fucking exist until Jules Leotard invented it in the mid 1800s. So like neither did the leotard. So those characters couldn't possibly have been doing that at the American Museum anyway.
Right. I mean, there was definitely like high in the air tricks, but yeah, a lot of the swinging and flipping and all. Yeah, no, that. I mean, what people used to do as traveling acrobats is completely insane by our standards now. I mean, if you just sort of look at what circus performers did, and like with no safety, is insane.
No nets at all. In fact, the woman that I just mentioned, Miss Lala, she used to perform, like you said, in a mixed race performance with this woman named Miss Cara, who was white. And that woman fell brutally to her death and then lived like 5 agonizing days before finally expiring. And then she quit, like Miss Lala quit after that. But It was the only time that Kara didn't have her husband there spotting her. And he was psychotic about spotting her on everything. And the two of them were huge teetotalers because they were like, you guys are all fucking drunk and I don't want my wife to die. Can you please do your job? And the one day she was like, nah, just go do your other performance in another city and we'll be fine.
I've done
and
this
then she
a
died.
million times. It'll be fine.
Yep.
Nope.
It's the one time.
So yeah, there's a big fucking fight and it was theatrical as hell. And here is how they have the museum burned down in the movie.
Which absolutely is not at all correct at all. No. The Confederate Army tried to burn the museum down in 1864, but it just burned down in 1865.
Yeah, and because in Gangs of New York, they had it burning down because of the draft riots, and that's not true either. But it was there at that time period, and it did burn down. And that's when sort of his music, I mean, being full of all those wax figures, I mean, it was ready to go poof, along with all that wood.
It sure was. And you know, the fireman scene in, if they had a fireman scene in this, would have been considerably more violent than the fireman scene from Gangs of New York, because the firemen didn't put out the fire. All they did was murder animals. The burning animals were trying to escape the fire. They would just hack them down with axes or shoot them. Unfortunately, the whales just boiled to death in their thing. But the whales died all the time. They lived in the basement in a 500 square foot tank. And
oh, Jesus.
Beluga whales. And they would die all the time, and so you would just get more.
Right, yeah.
By the way, if anybody who is related to P.T. Barnum is listening to this, please get in touch with me, because I would like to fight your whole family. All of them. Dig up the corpses of your dead relatives and fight them too.
Yeah, so in this musical, they just showed the fire engine going by. They're like, yep, nope, that's all we're going to show that. Nope, don't need.
And we found the guy who did it, which they did.
No, none of that. None of that. So this is where, we get into the crossover of American history and this movie again, because he talks about just being in a tent and then taking advantage of the new American railroads and taking his show on the road. Well, taking his show on the railroad.
The Great American Railroad. 3 meals a day. As the man's announcing, trying to get people to work on it.
Right, but if you're watched and continue to watch Warrior, you'll see that working on the railroad was no such thing.
Well, the Chinese laborers were given way different wages and food than the black laborers or the white laborers. They all had very different diets.
And they had very different jobs. I mean, Barnum comes back from working on the railroad and he's got like a suit and stuff. He probably, had worked in the pay office or something like that.
Yes, in this fictitious account.
Right, which he didn't.
He might have been a ticket salesman or something. But he was a farmer's kid. He would have just been a laborer.
Yeah.
Although he was a lazy thieving farmer's kid.
And a flim-flam artist.
I guess he would.
So
Yeah, he would have weaseled his way into any other job.
And he did actually start a newspaper when he was much younger that went up against the hard Calvinist religiosity of his part of Connecticut, and he got thrown in jail for it. So
lovely Danbury.
So he was against religious extremism from a young age. So that's why I'm not willing to call him the worst person in the world.
Okay. Are we gonna? We were going to determine whether we're gonna watch Barnum with an exclamation point after this, or there's Barnum with a period, or if we were going to move on to something else. Do you have maybe like a musical about Pol Pot we could watch, or maybe we could do a musical about Hitler?
Well, there's the Nixon in China opera.
Oh, there you go. Or maybe there's one about Unit 731 and all the good things they did for medical science. Joseph Mengele, the musical.
Oh, God. Now, Mengele is scary to me because even though he's been made out to be this huge monster, at the time, he was just the epitomization of banal evil. Like, evil that people encourage because it's convenient.
Yeah, I've been struggling to put history into perspective recently, and we were watching something about the invention of dog food, and about how hard it was to get dog food into grocery stores because people didn't want, just like these dumbass commercials where I'm like, who the fuck are these people that are like, you can't put dog food in a refrigerator? Those people like, apparently exist, and that's all people were back in the early 1900s. And then I was like, oh, well, they didn't think black people were human either. So I guess there's, like, you're not feeding a black person the same food you're eating. I guess you're not feeding the dog the same food you're eating either.
Right.
Jesus Christ. Like,
Yeah.
Every time I'm like, how the fuck are they? Oh, they have different water fountains. Jesus Christ. Like,
Yeah. I mean, and this was the whole science thing. When people start to categorize things, they definitely go overboard. And quite a few people use it for fucking evil.
Yeah. There was a stupid ass song that we used to sing on the playground. This land is my land. This land ain't your land. Mm-hmm. I got a shotgun and you don't got one. Yeah. That song is so America. If you don't get off, I'll blow your head off. Yeah. This land was made for me, not you. Yes. Holy shit.
Yes.
Holy shit. Why do I even know that song? What a horrible thing to sing.
I just went back to like third grade.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, but we all sang that, and wow, we're a bunch of psychopaths.
Children are cruel. Children are terrible, terrible monsters.
Yep, they are. And then they grow up to be the Prince of Humbug, which, by the way, was his actual nickname. Well, the Prince of Humbugs was his name, although he had that dope hat, that Willy Wonka hat that said the Prince of Humbug. But
yeah.
Humbug means false talk or behavior, which I had no idea until today. Now I understand what bah humbug means. Oh, that's bullshit is what it means. That's bullshit.
Right.
I had no idea.
Okay.
Here we are. Now you guys know too.
See, this is one thing that reading all of those, like, really janky 19th century romance novels, they do teach you the slang of the era.
Oh, all right. Well, I guess I just need to get up on my...
Or Jane Austen, one or the other.
Oh God, no, I couldn't. See, H.P. Lovecraft and Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, they didn't have these. They didn't have any of these words in them. There was no humbug. I was learning tortuous and gibbous.
There you go.
The gibbous moon.
So at the end, Barnum decides to take things on the road. So he takes things on the railroad. And I was just thinking about what was going on in America at that time that was making this possible. So he was traveling around in his own personal train.
Oh, I think you have asked the wrong question. But do continue. But I think the question is, what made him take this show on the road rather than what made this possible?
Well, okay, two different things. So talk about why he had to go on the road.
Because the United States was in a horrific economic depression, and he kept losing his fortune over and over and over again. And it was all Andrew Jackson's fault. Because Andrew Jackson hated central banks, and he refused to form one. And so all of our money was backed by gold coin, which meant you could go to a bank and be like, here's $1, give me $1 in gold. And they had to give it to you. And that isn't how any monetary system that works. Especially since if you're a country that is fighting wars nonstop, if you give the ability of your enemies to pay to capture your money and then go to a bank and get gold for it, you are fucking yourself. And
yeah, Andrew Jackson being like this, I'm just a simple Kentucky frontier boy, which was pretty much bullshit, but he did not believe in credit at all. It was like cash on the barrelhead or forget it. He was
one of the dumbest people who's ever opened his mouth in public in the United States.
Yeah, he also was not a good man.
No, he was certainly not. But yeah, the America that P.T. Barnum lived in was a shithole. And Europe was a mess because everybody was fighting civil wars at the time. Everything was a revolution. So Constantly. So there was no stability anywhere. And it's just like, well, hell, we might as well pick up and move this on the road because he had to keep scamming people in different cities anyway.
Right. People who hadn't seen this like made up fabricated mermaid thingy that he just kept in a box. Like once you see that, you're like, oh, okay.
Exactly.
It's like this weird little mummified skeleton of a monkey sewed to a fishtail, but okay, which is what it was. But I was just thinking about like why this was possible. We were developing this railroad network that he could travel around on. We had railroad manufacturers, like the largest or we were making the most trains of anywhere in the world at this point.
We started laying track right around the time that he was born, right? I know the first steamship happened right around that time between New York and... So 1810 was when he was born, and by, 1815, we were starting to lay track, right? So by the 1840s, the trains went where? About to St. Louis? Is about, like, from the East Coast to about there?
Yeah, somewhere before the Continental Divide and kind of on this side of the Mississippi River, a lot of places. But in a lot of places, they were laying track faster than they could make metal rails. So there was a fair amount of the first train tracks that were just wooden track with a strip of metal on top of them. And then they were slowly replaced with like the steel rails.
Oh my God! People can't see the look of horror that's going on my face, but I can see the whites of my eyes, and I'm like, oh my God! I really have a lot of whites showing in my eyes. Woo! That sounds. I mean, so nobody, you guys would have to watch a series of documentaries on trains to understand exactly how much maintenance goes into train tracks. But this is not like roads where you can just ride on them and then you stop. Every time a train goes over train tracks, you should probably check the tracks to make sure they're not fucked up. And they have to stay in a really, really tight tolerance, or else the train derails. And so if you're not using metal and you're using wood warps.
It's warping all the time.
With the world's heaviest thing that wood's ever held up on top of it. And that thing is literally, it's on fire.
I was going to say, you have like this...
And throwing burning ash into the sky. So it was setting the surrounding countryside on fire, and it's riding wooden tracks. Time. Yes. Yeah. Woo! Yeah. What a fucking nightmare. One thing I did love about this film is it showed all the smoke in the background. I mean, it was hilarious. All the white laundry that was out, like... That shit would be black. Nobody's putting that shit out there. But, like, yeah, it was... I really liked all the smoke billowing in the background in the scenes.
Just everywhere, yeah. So you had the railroad happening. You had industrial fabric manufacture. So that's why he could have these huge tents. In order to have a big circus tent, you needed to have the industrial fabric manufacture that was happening in the U.S. at this time.
Yes, and... that was a huge thing, right? Because they had just started building bigger looms.
Right.
And that was also part of what contributed to the Civil War, was the fact that they were starting to industrialize, or am I incorrect there? Wasn't cotton production industrialized? I know that there was a cotton blight. There was the Hessian fly that had killed off our cotton, which was part of the thing that caused the collapse of the U.S. economy in the 1830s and 40s.
Right, yeah.
So we weren't able to, like, get loans because they were secured by our cotton crop.
Uh-huh.
But the industrialization that Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, that was happening at the same time, right?
Right, and then there were fights between the North and South about, like, what technology, like, right about this time, the North was mechanizing and sort of making their iron manufacture a lot more sophisticated and investing in it. And so they had like rolling mills so they could do like armor plate and wire and stuff like that. Whereas in the South, where they were still depending on all of this human labor that they had already invested in and bought, they didn't want to invest in all this mechanization because all of these people that they owned would lose their value. And so northern metal manufacturing was completely outpacing and kicking the ass of the iron manufacturer in the South.
Oh, shit. And this is exactly the same time that slave prices are going up because they had banned the importation of slaves in a lot of places. So, like, I know that when he bought that woman whose name escapes me at the moment, but that poor woman that he bought, the price was $1,000 for this 80-year-old woman because that's how fucking expensive slaves were at the time. So the South was, I guess, really getting pinched between the economic collapse, the fact that their cotton wasn't being secured by any gold or getting them loans.
Yeah.
They were really in a tough spot. And I guess that probably contributed to a lot of the internecine strife. Because he had some problems in the South, in Alabama and things like that, as I recall. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of just struggle. Oh, there's one insult that they keep using in the movie about peanuts. You know, you smell of peanuts. Oh, I don't eat peanuts.
Blah, yeah, yeah.
And that was all going on.
George Washington Carver was around that time.
He was post-Civil War. But at this point, we're still pre-Civil War when this movie is mostly happening. And peanuts were known as a pig food. You would fatten your pigs to make like good hands on peanuts, but they were also known as a slave food. And so introducing peanuts as a snack food up in the north as you're getting some of the Great Migration, it was like anybody who would eat peanuts, like why would you be eating animal food? Why would you be eating slave food?
Well, now, let us just, for people who do not live in the Southeast, you already know what I'm talking about. So but if you do not live in the Southeast, you don't understand what they're eating. They're not eating peanuts, delicious peanuts that you are used to eating. They are eating boiled peanuts. And there's no way that I could articulate the tragedy that is a boiled peanut to you, but you really do come to the realization that they are beans. Goddamn.
Right.
Boiled peanuts are a culinary nightmare.
Well, you've never had good ones. There are good ones out there.
If you say so. My sister lives my whole family lives in Charleston. I've had those goddamn things shoved down my throat at many bars, and it doesn't matter how drunk I am, it still tastes like shit.
Well, when they're all smushy and nasty and don't have enough salt in them, they're terrible.
Yes, always undersalted. They're soggy and undersalted. God.
Yeah, no, because they really are.
It would be like somebody feeding you wet popcorn.
That's a great wet unsalted popcorn.
Wet unsalted popcorn. And popcorn predates corn, by the way, I learned.
Yeah, eating fresh corn, absolutely. Because it used to be in these little hard...
teosinte.
Yes, it used to be in like these little hard shells. Like if you think about like rice or wheat or whatever, it has this like hard shell and you would have to like beat it with a thresher to pop the grain out of it. Instead of just like popping the corn grain out of it, they'd heat it on the fire and it'd go poop and you'd get popcorn out. Yeah.
I thought that was so fun because now I'm imagining like, because I'm way off topic, but I love imagining like ancient Mayans eating just popping popcorn and eating it.
See, in my brain, it's like some little kid discovered it because the parents are like, "Hey, quit bothering me. Go play with your sister around the fire." And they like pop the popcorn. They're like, "Ooh."
Oh yeah, like they threw the corn in there just being stupid, and then all of a sudden it started popping out.
Yeah, it would be like because teosinte almost looks like a barley head.
Oh, I've never seen a barley head. I don't think most people who are listening to this have seen a barley head.
So if you go look at just even grass in your lawn that goes to seed, that little like seed head, some version of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That probably wouldn't be terrible. And they were too hard to grind, I discovered. So these things are basically rocks. And then all of a sudden, the nutrition literally explodes out of them. I love that whole thing. It's amazing. But anyway, so we're back to...
you think people can do like cool botany now? They were doing some serious ass botany back then to make it.
Yeah, that was molecular gastronomy, like 200 BC.
Yes, but so yeah, back to the movie. So we get to the end of the movie. He takes the show on the road and he hooks up with the Bailey guy to do Barnum and Bailey circus, and we get the circus that sort of existed on and off more or less through the middle of the 20th century and on into the 1970s and kind of the 80s when people said, maybe we shouldn't be so mean to the animals.
Yeah, imagine. Yeah. Oh, and so in the movie they talk about Jumbo briefly, and that is where we get the name Jumbo from, as the world's biggest elephant, which that dickhead ran over with a train like 2 years after he got it. And then he stuffed it and filled its body with wooden, like a wooden structure to fill it out. Yeah.
Sawdust, basically. Yeah.
It's classy. It's a classy man. But that's where we got the word jumbo from. So now we can say he's a jumbo-sized dickhead.
I'll let you say that for sure. No arguments at all. So yes, a terrible movie if you wanted to actually learn history.
Oh, just the worst. Although let's talk the fit of the clothes. The color of the clothes was bang on. The costuming was insanely good.
Yes, they had a lot of fun. There was definitely way more shiny stuff than there would have been. You could see a lot more people's butts than you would have seen. But in terms of the clothes that they were wearing, the cut of the clothes, excellent. The use of purple and pink and magenta was super duper spot on because that was the flashiest color of the day, and he would have been all over that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that guy was definitely, he was ahead of the curve on all things having to do with like anything that will excite your eyes.
Yes, yes. And he did that. A lot of the fonts that they were using for his advertisements, again, printing was being mechanized at this point, and metallurgy was so that they could do sort of these big, wild printed posters and do the hot lead stamping of the letters.
So was he the first one to really start doing like the posting of bills
No,
and stuff like that?
but he...
Oh, okay.
But he took it.
I know that they made a big show about how he just like pamphleted and leafleted the shit out of everything.
Religious people did that first. But I think he may have brought some color to it, and he probably used a lot of words to hand out on pamphlets to hand out to people, and images that were startling.
And people would have kept those, right, for their scrapbooks? Because that would have been, yeah, so...
Oh, hell yeah.
Because they didn't have Instagram back then, but they did have scrapbooks they would have kept to show people where they had been, different book quotes that they liked, things like that, right?
Right, right. And, you know, little watercolor pictures that they had made for each other. And, tickets to shows, dance cards, you know, all that sort of thing for sure. One funny thing is his daughters were dressed in pink all of the time, which would have been fairly ahistorical. At this point in history, in the middle of the 19th century, little girls were always dressed in blue. And this gets back into the Christianity push.
Oh, that's fun. This is kind of Democrats and Republicans switch sides, and so did pink and blue.
Right, because at this point, blue was seen as like this very calm color, and then it also called back to the fact that the Virgin Mary in all the paintings has a blue mantle or veil or shawl or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, okay.
And so blue was this color for like good little girls, whereas pink was associated with the color red, which, you know, if you go back to humorism, yeah, right. Red is blood. Red is hot. And so loose women, whores, sex workers were painting their cheeks pink and their mouths red. And so oh my God, you would not dress your child, your good little girl, in pink. Salacious.
When the daughter was like rouged on stage and everything like that, were they putting makeup on children at the time, or was that not a thing?
Not for like this nifty-wifty ballet performance, but moms would go around pinching their daughter's cheeks.
Oh, so that cheek pinching shit that grandmas used to do was like something you did to make your kid look healthy.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
my kid has every vitamin deficiency on the planet, so I'm going to resolve people's judgment of me by pinching the shit out of my kid's cheeks.
Oh, I mean, something that was still said in the 70s was, whores rouge, a lady pinches.
That's butt fucking crazy. It takes watching a movie from the 70s to remember what the 70s were like. I know I was born in the 70s, but like imagining my dad as Pepe Le Pew chasing every woman who walked through his office like a dog chasing a bird is crazy to me, but that's what was happening. Like, just everybody acted like a maniac at all times.
Right. Well, that's how you let women know that you like them. You reached out and invaded their space.
Grab them by the pussy.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't talk to them because, you know, us ladies and our tiny lady brains.
Your brain's 2/3 the size of mine. It's science.
So once I get too many big words in there, they just all fall out and it breaks my uterus. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, that's how you end up with a wandering uterus, which is an actual medical condition that they believed existed in the time of P.T. Barnum, and in fact, he might have had a display about it. The wandering uterus.
It could just end up anywhere in your body. You don't know.
Just crawls around in there.
Mm-hmm. It's a very scary organ, Jamie.
It certainly scared men back in the day. How were there gynecologists who were like, yep, sounds about right. I've never seen a vagina before. What were they doing their job with their eyes closed?
Well, what they would do is they basically envision the woman's reproductive system as an entirely separate entity from her body. And so if you look at the medical illustrations of women, it's just like these disembodied parts. Whereas when you look at more illustrations of men and their bodies, they're much more like a suggestion that they're a part of a body. But the baby growing inside of the woman was seen like completely separate from the woman. Like the woman was just this like faceless, nameless, soulless vessel.
Well, isn't that lovely? They really just... P.T. Barnum would have thought the world of you.
I'm not saying I approve. I just know about it.
You know, he had a woman who was actually taller than that Irish giant, who in the movie the Irish giant was rebranded from being Russian, which wasn't true. He was actually Irish.
But that's sort of the type of thing that Barnum 100% would have done, though. He would have
without question.
Yeah, he would have just rebranded people however he wanted.
This was also the time. So tall people were really like a fetish in this time period for some reason. And King, was it Frederick of Prussia? He had an entire bodyguard made of men who were over 6 feet tall because he was the dad was really closeted, and then his son was raised to be like this toy soldier with all these guards, and he was not closeted. He was just in love with those big, strong, strapping men, and they used to kidnap them from all around Europe. They would kidnap them, put them in a coffin, and ship them to fucking Prussia, and then they would just unbox them. Look, here's your giant that we stole from. Oh my God,
that's a hell of an unboxing video.
Yeah, it was. That would be a crazy unboxing video. Oh my God. So people would get there starved, covered in their own waste. Like, what the fuck is happening? But that was happening in Europe at the time.
You know, just buying people, kidnapping people so you could own them. It's very much a theme of the 19th century. And I think, yeah.
It has never, ever occurred to me that I could just go take a person, just snatch one up like this kitty and just be like, this is mine now.
Yeah, and then when you get sick of them, you just like, well, I'm done with you now. Bye-bye. Ta-ta. Go away. All right. So we are at the end of the movie, and PT shows up at her dance recital on a CGI elephant.
Ah, yes. Yes. I don't know if he ever rode an elephant, but yeah, it was a CGI elephant after all. I'm glad that all the animals in this movie were CGI.
I said the same thing. I'm like, there was absolutely no reason to bring actual animals into...
Yeah, I think more than enough animals have been hurt by the memory of P.T. Barnum. I don't think we need to go any further with it.
Right. They weren't important. I'm like, they were just as flashy and ridiculous as everybody else in the dance numbers. And so that worked for me. So... Yep, our boy Barnum has a little postscript. He goes on to be the mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut. He goes to the Connecticut State Legislature. He funds Tufts College.
Yeah, I think that's actually how he's listed on Wikipedia as an American politician. He was only a mayor for like 1 year.
Right.
Yeah, there were dogs that were mayors in the 19th century, so...
right.
Yeah.
And as we've seen in different places, heck, I mean, almost anyone can be a mayor if they really want to. Barnum was living in an era of tumult and change, and he was really there to make the most money off of any new novelty or thing he made up that he could in this age of confusion and scientific marvels.
Yeah, and I mean, to that end, and actually to the end, one of the fun things that I thought about this man who had very few things fun to say about him was the way that he got people out of his museum. And I think it would be a fun way to take us out of this podcast.
Do tell.
He put up a sign that said, "This way to egress."
Okay.
That was by any display that people would be lingering by too long and keeping people from being able to see. And nobody knew what the fuck egress meant, and so they would follow it because they thought it would be, oh, I can't wait to see what this egress is, and then they would walk out the back door.
Is it like an exotic bird? I don't know.
Exactly. I can't wait. Yeah, it sounds like an egress sounds like a huge waterfowl or something like that, like an egret.
Yes.
I thought that was pretty fun. And he really was great at that. He was great at, like, showing you something and letting your imagination fill in the details.
Right.
He basically put a ring light on the face of humanity.
Ooh.
Just blast the shit out of it with light, and, you don't have to worry about how many pores are open on a nose.
Right.
Yeah, you don't need to see the ugliness. You only want to see the pretty parts.
And then you also can't sort of see what's around it because that's all in shadow. So you got to fill that in as well.
Wow, that was bang on the money, that analogy.
So it sounds like next week we'll take a little more serious look at this guy, or are we going to move on to something else?
Or we can watch something else.
In the meantime, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me on the Instagram at Plague of Strength, on television on ESPN in a 30 for 30 about American gladiators, or on my website, Plague of Strength. Where can they find you?
You can find me talking about the beginning of the 19th century and all the fighting and more fighting that we did at that time, and how food was all tangled up in that on my podcast, The History of American Food.
It's food to fight to.
There you go. And then, of course, we also have our brand new Instagram and account on Threads, which is at PCG Podcast.
Yes, we are official.
Yes. And I think at this point, we might have some bonus episodes that we'll be considering.
Yes. We're going to be putting up a Discord soon and getting everything squared away. I'm sure the Discord will probably already exist by the time this podcast is, or by this time this episode is going.
That's the plan. That's the plan. So, yeah, stay tuned, and we'll make any announcements on events and bonus episodes and all these things we figured out in real time on our Instagram and our Threads feed.
Yes, and enjoy your week, and thanks for listening.
All right. Bye. We're on Instagram at PCG Podcast, and you can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.